Because we are working with smaller companies, our value proposition is, look, we can do something together that you need to grow your business. So the things you will do anyway, we can de-risk it, we can even fund it, and we can also provide research expertise to solve some of the problems that you currently have.
Hello, and welcome to the Research Valorisation podcast series. My name is Todd Davey, Associate Partner at UIIN, and I'm your host for today. In this episode, we have invited Milica Symul, CEO of iLAunCH and COO of the University of Southern Queensland, to talk about the Trailblazer Universities Program, a highly innovative local program developed in Australia. Milica discusses the program's focus on commercialisation, tech acceleration, workforce development, and STEM education. Really excited to have today's guest, Milica Symul, who's the CEO of iLAunCH. She's also the COO of University of Southern Queensland, but some of the positions that she formerly held, really wide-ranging positions as the Associate Director of Space Industry Hub at RMIT University, as well as the Chief Operating Officer at OpenSI, Director of Research and Innovation at the University of Canberra, Deputy Director at ANU Institute for Space, as well as the Investment Fund Manager at ANU Connect Ventures. So, Milica, welcome.
Thank you, Todd, and thank you for having me today.
Yeah, really looking forward to diving into your experience, but also specifically looking at the Trailblazer Universities Program. And I just wanted to understand a little bit more about how it came about, what was the original need that was identified that led to the creation of the program.
Thanks, Todd. So this came about, I think, 2021, 2022. It was with the previous government in Australia who basically did a review of Australian commercialisation endeavours and translation of research into the industry. And Australia is really punching above its weight in terms of production of scientific papers. We are very well ranked in terms of university research and universities in general, but where we are lacking is really that translational piece. So there is not many university IP that actually ends up in industry, and we are really lacking in that domain. So under the Commercialisation Action Plan, which was released in 2022, there was a draft of reforms that were proposed by government to support basically that commercialization and innovation agenda and reform the way we collaborate with industry, we fund also entrepreneurship and innovation and new ventures. So government put aside a large investment. It was about $2 billion across many initiatives, and one of the initiatives was Trailblazer Universities Program that was awarded $245 million, and 6 universities basically were awarded funding to basically improve the way we do business with industry and also to improve the way we commercialize IP within the university sector. And these 6 universities basically were awarded funding for various disciplines, spanning from critical minerals, energy, recycling, food, defense, and space. And the Space Trailblazer, which I'm part of, is actually a regional trailblazer as well. So one of the agendas from the government was that one of the Trailblazer universities will be led by regional university, which is really to also transform the regional areas of Australia and bring companies and spin-outs as well, so to create that vibrant ecosystem. So University of Southern Queensland, in collaboration with Australian National University and University of South Australia, won the bid for the Space Trailblazer, and that's how we were created. So we officially started at the beginning of 2023. So we are now in the first 18 months, but it's a very fast program. So when you look at it, we have been awarded 50 million from the government. And then we have co-investments from industry and universities. So the whole programmatic of Trailblazer is that that everyone has a skin in the game and everyone contributes towards this agenda. So it's not just government money that's poured into this. There is lots of industry funding and university funding to set up programs like this. So that's a little bit of a history where we landed and how this all came about.
Fantastic. That background, I think it's very profound in terms of how Australia has progressed with its research and development and the lack of the development side of things. And so from that perspective, the program really hits a niche. I just wanted to understand a little bit more about how the program actually works. Could you step us through just, that I think there's a component which is dedicated to research and commercialisation, as well as another that's more on the educational and talent development side.
Yeah, so the program basically has 4 pillars, and the big pillar for us is that core commercialization project. So these are big transformative projects that we work in collaboration with industry. So that's one of the biggest pillars, is transforming that research and translating that research in partnership with industry. Then we have acceleration or accelerator, what we call accelerator. That's geared towards earlier TRLs or technology readiness levels. In the core commercialization pillar, we look at the technologies and projects that are at that 4 to 5 technology readiness levels. So they are a little bit more advanced. They're not just concepts in the lab, where industry basically would have an interest, and we can, through this program, de-risk the further development of the technology. Then we have an accelerator program, which is kind of earlier TRL. So we're looking at something that's at the earlier stage, and we want to incentivize researchers to work with industry to actually, for that short sprint projects where we can, within 6 months, accelerate that TRL a little bit further upwards, and also to educate our researchers how to work with industry, how to commercialize, what's the difference between technology readiness level and market readiness level and things like that. So that's where we are basically also equipping our researchers with that kind of bit more a business acumen and innovation acumen as well. Then we have an educational part, which really looks at the workforce for the future, but the workforce also from the perspective of industry. So what are the demands of industry for future skills? So very often you hear in the universities that curriculums are outdated, that some of the industry, especially software engineering, even the space technologies, that the industry is transforming in a much faster pace than what universities are teaching, and that readiness of the graduates not yet there. So in our educational portfolio, we have a couple of kind of key performance indicators we need to meet, but the big emphasis of this is that it has to be driven by industry need, that it has to have components of bachelor's degree that will be co-designed with industry in mind, and also those things what we call in Australia micro-credentials. So those are the short courses that can be recognized as credits towards degree, and universities in Australia are looking for that modular approach to education. So not only you are enrolled in degree and you do the grind for 4 years and then you graduate, it's those pick and choose what you need, especially for targeting the professionals who are upskilling or needing that extra bit of education. And then there is the whole STEM component of outreach, because every other country, I think, in the world, we have a gap in kids taking up STEM subjects, especially engineering, maths, science. So we want to inspire school children to go into those disciplines, and also to have diversity and to encourage more girls, of course, into these disciplines. So we have that kind of outreach component where we do look at various levels, from very early ages, like year 3s and 4s, to then a bit more seniors in senior years, to keep the drive, because space is quite inspiring. And it doesn't mean, space is the hook to science and science subjects, and that's what we want to use space for. Not everyone will end up in the space industry, but just having an interest is good. And space is becoming also more multidisciplinary than just a rocket scientist. Our aim is to really boost that interest in STEM disciplines. And then our last, go ahead.
So I was going to say, you're really taking on some chunky topics there. You've got, if I look at translating research, I mean, that's a massive challenge. Same with, trying to encourage kids to get into STEM. How do you achieve that within the life of the program? How long is the program set to go for? And how do you really get that translation piece working?
Yeah, so our program is actually quite fast. So it was initially 4 years, but it took us probably 6 months to sign the contracts and do all of the paperwork. So you lose 6 months and then it becomes 3.5 year program, which is quite challenging because in space industry, we always say space is hard. For us, barrier to entry is much harder to get to TRL 8, which means space qualified, is much harder than in other industries. So how practically we are doing that is we have a suite of projects basically with our industry partners. We have a very strict technology roadmap. So we are monitoring that basically, if not on a daily basis, but at least on a quarterly basis when those reports and quarterly progress reports come through. We do have a quite strict KPI. So we run our project at the industry standard. So it's not very often in research environment, you go in your lab, things happen, you work, you publish, but here is really to push the boundaries and to get researchers to work at the pace that industry is working. And that in itself is what we call a reform piece. So that's where we see the transformative way of how universities traditionally were doing business. So that all comes through monitoring, reporting, keeping staff accountable to deadlines, and also choosing, probably the biggest, the most important thing is choosing those projects where we think that we can achieve that in 4 years or 3.5 years time. So for us, how we measure success is really that we have space manufacturing Trailblazer. So we are not data driven, like we're not a downstream, with more upstream technologies. So producing something, for us, success looks like that for projects that we have, we will have a suite of products that will be either qualified to go to space. So that means that they will go and pass all of the environmental tests like vacuum, pressures, mechanical shock tests as well, so that these products can withstand actually launching conditions to go to space. Or products that will be actually on the missions and going to space and being one of those demonstrator missions. So for us, the goals are really either to qualify something that's ready to fly, but we might not have a flight for it, or having something on the satellite actually that will actually demonstrate technologies. So in practice, it does require kind of high level of project management and also high level of probably maturity within those project teams to actually undertake that. And that's why we always say that it's not endeavor for everyone. Not everyone wants to go with that very industry focused hat and progress their research in that way. So that's why we pick our projects in our academic teams when they actually want to go down that pathway of industry engagement and industry research.
And I guess that's something I wanted to also pick up because, again, incredibly ambitious within that time period. And I think what we saw during the time of COVID and the ability for science to react and to create a vaccine essentially within 9 months, when previously the fastest vaccine was developed in 4 years in the 1960s. It shows the potential for what happens if you can get government, industry, and academia come science sitting down and actually working together in an accelerated process. So I guess my next question relates to that industry side piece. How do you get and how are you attracting local industry in Australia? I mean, there's a lot of SMEs, maybe even more on the micro side. So how do you actually get them involved in the project and the program more concretely?
So you're completely right. So space industry in Australia, just for the audience who's not Australian, is quite in its infancy. So our space agency was created back in 2018. So we don't have necessarily a level of funding and level of coordination like other space nations that have been around for longer and that have a space agency that actually have missions funded by space agency. So in Australia, we operate in a very different environment. So our space agency is a regulatory body with very limited funding. So they do fund some of the projects, but not at the scale of NASA missions by any stretch of imagination. And then there is lots of will, of course, within the space industry, because it attracts people who are visionaries, who are dreamers, who want to do cool tech and cool stuff. And there's lots of startups and SMEs. We do have several primes. So these are big companies that work with defense and have their space segments as well that are predominantly overseas. But majority really of industry, space industry, are SMEs and startups. So how do we attract these smaller companies to come and be part of our program? So one thing for us, and one good thing is probably that government has put money on the table. So of course, money and cash is the king, so everyone wants to come and work with you and be part of it. In the last 2 years, Australia has lost its national mission. So with the change of government, national mission was cancelled. So that was a big shift in really Australian ecosystem, where that big endeavor, where everyone was waiting for this big thing to come and every industry to have that big push that has unfortunately has not gone ahead. So that put us in quite a good spot in terms of you are a centerpiece when there is no industry, you are creating industry. So one thing for us is, because we are working with smaller companies, which is riskier, of course, is that we look to align companies with projects that they will anyway need to progress their business. So it's not come work with us and we will do some things that we will want to do that will be in addition to what your business is. Our value proposition is, look, we can de-risk and we can do something together, but the things that you actually need to grow your business. So the things you will do anyway, we can de-risk it, we can even fund it, and we can also provide research expertise to solve some of the problems that you currently have, which might be either costly for you to solve or you just won't have an expertise. So our value proposition really is to bring industry with us and to work within the parameters of their business rather than being an add-on, because that doesn't work for small companies. So that's predominantly where our business proposition is, to bring those smaller players on board.
Okay. I'm reading between the lines a little here, but it sounds as though this program would also be a major initiative to further build the space industry in Australia. That's in some ways, it's a nice challenge to have, but I guess also it is a challenge. How do you then get that aggregation going, and then from that also connect internationally with the other organizations who are going to be in the same sort of supply chain?
So that's a very good question. So there is a question of financial viability and longevity, because while you have kind of funding, you're okay, but then what happens next? So how do we see ourselves heading towards that sustainability is really, at the moment, we do have 6 very different segments, focus segments that iLAunCH is currently interested in. We are going to be looking at where those segments will lead us. So our main objective really is to have at least 2 or 3 missions that will be launched, where we can demonstrate technologies and then see how that spills over into the next missions and next endeavors. So we are hoping that by the end of the iLAunCH, we will be demonstrating technologies that are of interest internationally. So our Australian space industry is quite small, and you cannot make a business model or make lots of money if you are selling only in Australia, because it's just a small market. So you have to go overseas, you have to be internationally competitive. And Australia does have some uniqueness around geographical location, around just naturally we don't have a big cloud coverage. So for us, for example, optical communications is something that you can do quite well here, just because geographically you are well positioned. So there are technologies that other countries are looking at that they might not be able to achieve, and we will be able to kind of leapfrog that within a very short period of time. So that's one way to look at, okay, everything that we are doing and everything that's aggregating, the outcome of that needs to feed into international supply chain. So it needs to be useful elsewhere. The other thing where we are looking at, and this is the concepts we are working at, is very often there is no opportunities or platforms for engagement and collaboration at scale. So we can do things when we know people somewhere within other organizations internationally, but we are not, if you are, let's say your company in Asia and you might have a capital and you might be interested in looking at some technologies in Australia, there is no at scale model where you can actually do that. So the idea also of a Trailblazer is to look at that. How do you build those platforms where you can actually now aggregate everything into the platform where you can now scale up your international collaborations. So removing that peer-to-peer or bottom-up type thing where you can actually start attracting capital from outside. And that's something that I think will be necessary to do. We know that in UK, Catapult has tried to do something like that, to aggregate everything and be that one point of contact and one front door. Would that work for us? We don't know, but we are hoping that, because in the current ecosystem with a very small capital pool, with space agency that's predominantly regulatory body, we think that we can actually capture that and become that in next 4 years.
And we just wanted to pick up the investment piece just for a second, because you mentioned obviously there's going to be co-investment by industry. For that sort of industry profile that we have previously mentioned, how do you make sure that they will come on board with the funding? You mentioned that, okay, we have projects that are really aligned with their needs. Is that the main focus? I just wanted to understand a bit more the balance of research projects versus will you be focusing on licensing or spin-outs, or, how do you find that balance that secures that sort of investment and helps you to achieve the things that you need to achieve in the program?
That is a challenge. So we are looking at both licensing and spin-outs. Of course, licensing will probably be a little bit easier road to go through than spin-outs, but there are universities who are looking to spin out their startups. To build sustainable model, I think it will depend on multiple factors. And I think multiple factors will also be international and also larger companies being part of it, and also defense industries being part of it. So when you look at the funding landscape, really, we cannot rely necessarily on trickles from the government for one individual project here and there, and then when that dries out, there is nothing else. I think we need to look if we can sell the bigger capability to an end user, being potentially defense, being international prime, being international collaborator, where we can build a mission together and have that aggregated capital to fund this in the future. So it is a challenge. I think it's not to be underestimated. I think also from the venture capital side, the risk is space is very risky. So that's not something that's easy to fund. So it will be a combination of things. I think we cannot pinpoint into one particular source that will be the magic bullet. I think it will be a multiple things for multiple different purposes, where you will have a multiple streams of customers that might be able to and be willing to pay for the product or service.
One of the things I also wanted to pick up on was, we've mentioned a number of challenges, but specifically the regional aspect. How will that operate? And maybe also you could fill us in a little bit about the combination of whether it's a physical or it's a digital location that you have, and how the program works from that perspective.
So our headquarters is in Toowoomba, which is regional Queensland. Toowoomba is about 1.5 hours drive from Brisbane, so it's not as remote as many other parts of Australia, but it is considered.
It's remote. For people in Europe, it's quite remote.
It's remote, yeah. And being regionally located, it's always a challenge. It's challenge to attract the staff. It's challenge to attract the suppliers as well. So we are working with the communities around and businesses around to solve that problem, to have that attractive proposition. I mean, Toowoomba is a beautiful country town with a very friendly people, and we need to sell that as well as a part of the package. It's not only coming to the capital centers. We also have our other two nodes. So one is with Australian National University, which is in Canberra, Canberra. So Canberra is the capital of Australia. Although Canberra is about 3 hours from Sydney inland city, and it's a government city, so they consider actually themselves as a regional town as well, although all of the government agencies are there. So it's a regional town with an edge because they have that edge of being connected to the government. And then we have Adelaide node, which is with University of South Australia. So there are 3 nodes that are covering majority of Australian space activities. And for us, the regional aspect really is developing the industries and industry clusters around those universities, because I think that's the power of the ecosystem lies within the proximity as well of university research, proximity to innovation. And for regional town like Toowoomba, University of Southern Queensland has that civic side of it, because it does pull the town and education and all of the things that come up. It does provide that economical benefit. So for us, in terms of what we mean by regional development, is really developing those businesses, clustering those businesses, and providing opportunities for those businesses to partner with the university. And that can be in a variety of ways. It doesn't need to be in a space project. It can be on an educational piece. It can be a small accelerator type grant that's between $20,000 to $100,000 that will build up over time.
Melissa, thank you so much for the insights you provided. I've got 2 more questions to pose to you, and I'd like a 1-sentence response. I was speaking to a colleague yesterday about the fireside chat, and we're talking about the topic of space. And the question to me was, why space? Why do we need to be in space?
So just 1 sentence, which is hard, but space is inspiring first. It has sense of adventure, but also many services are dependent on space technologies. So in an essence, we cannot actually have the quality of life on Earth that we currently have if we don't have those technologies that are actually coming from satellites, through communication networks and other things. So if you switch off space tomorrow, we won't have banking system, basically.
Great answer. And now your future vision, what's going to be different in 5, 10, 15 years in Australia as a result of this program?
So I would like to, I said before, kind of space is like an essential ingredient. It's one of those industries and enabling technologies that we need. We can't live without it. So what I would like is to create that awareness to use space technologies for the benefit of Australia in terms of climate change, in terms of management of resources, and provide that, kind of economical kind of edge for Australia towards sustainability as well. So if we are looking at, it's not space for space sake, it's not just that adventurous side, it's space for Earth. And I would like to see benefits for that actually coming back to Australian economy.
Fantastic. Great job answering those last 2 questions. They're a little more difficult. Milica Symul, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your input today.
Thank you so much.
And good luck with the program.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion. Follow UIIN on LinkedIn. And if you're enjoying our podcast, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review in your podcast platform of choice to help other people find this content too.